published, 1701 EDT, the 5th of May 2018, updated, 2022 EDT, the 5th of May 2018. One of the most shocking moments during the 18 months I worked on Britain's Fat Fight, my new TV show, came when we filmed inside the Diabetes Centre at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. If there is a front line in our war against obesity, this surely is it. The casualties were all too obvious: people who have lost toes, limbs and even eyes to type 2 diabetes. I spoke to several of them. They all had different stories. One woman in her 50s, diagnosed with type 2 in her mid-20s, described her deep emotional connection to food and overeating. A man in his 70s admitted he used to be a big drinker and ate whatever he liked. But despite their differences, they all said a version of the same thing, as well as praising the fantastic care they were receiving from the NHS. They said they wished they'd had more support when they were younger, that they had understood better just how much harm they were doing to themselves. HUGH FEARNLEY-WHITTINGSTALL, pictured, has spent 18 months working on his latest TV show. Mr. Fearnley-Whittingstal, pictured, said over the past 30 years obesity rates have tripled. Now we have to work out what that support looks like, and put it in place, fast, because this is a war we're evidently losing. Obesity rates have tripled in the past 30 years to the point where 25% of us are now clinically obese and at serious risk of developing weight-related illnesses. Do nothing and that horrendous statistic will rise to half the population by 2050. The NHS is already beginning to buckle under the strain. Imagine doubling the problem it faces. Then the word catastrophe will be no exaggeration. When Julie, who collared me on the very first day of filming in Newcastle, took me to church, walk-in Walker, where she grew up, I began to get another insight into the problem. If you played a game of hunt the fresh vegetables in this part of town, you could be looking for weeks. There is one small supermarket that sells frozen foods, tinned foods and just about every brand of biscuit. The only fresh vegetables are spuds. Another convenience store across the precinct does sell a few apples, oranges, onions and cabbages, but from the state of some of them, they are not in high demand. I am not exactly sure how this has happened, but it feels like a downward spiral. Fresh vegetables are not particularly useful ingredients in mass-produced fast food. They are less stable than the fats, sugars and refined carbs that are the building blocks of industrially made foods. Even meat, with a few preservatives added, is more compliant. So the rise of fast food has been edging out the veg. Places like Walker are targeted by the food industry with aggressive advertising on billboards and at bus stops. And TV delivers a steady stream of ads that consolidate the message. In Chillingham Road, not far from Church Walk, there are 19 takeaways in a half-mile stretch. For many people living nearby, this is now their main source of food. So veg becomes less available, people eat less of it, and think less about it, and eventually it just falls off their radar. It's not that people can't peel a carrot or are too lazy to chop up a cabbage, as some will have it. It's that, in a food environment overrun with junk, it doesn't even occur to them to look for carrots and cabbages. And all too often, they are nowhere to be seen. This matters, because fruit and vegetables really are the foods that evolution has made most suitable for us. Eat them regularly and their incredible diversity of nutrients forms the bedrock of our health. Take away the veg and we are vulnerable. But people like Julie can see what's happening and they are a ray of hope. Julie has teamed up with great social enterprise called Food Nation to run cookery classes in Walker and other deprived parts of the city. And through her Council Estate Cook Twitter feed, she shares recipes and tips for eating on a budget. Mr. Fearnley-Whittingstal, pictured, said it is time for the government to intervene. These are great initiatives and we need more of them. But above all, we need to shift our food culture, so that the positive mentality of people like Julie, the belief that things can change for the better, really takes hold. Some will always argue that the responsibility for change is entirely a personal one. Only you can decide what you put in your mouth, right? But making these films about Britain's obesity crisis and spending time with those most affected by it, I'm convinced that a culture of blaming and shaming helps no one and completely misses the point. We haven't turned into a nation of lazy, greedy people in a single generation. Human nature hasn't suddenly transformed in 30 years. That's not how evolution works. Business, on the other hand, evolves at a terrifying rate. And the business of designing and selling mass-produced food has rapidly outstripped our ability to defend ourselves against it. There's an arms race going on between big food brands competing for our appetite, and we are ultimately the cannon fodder. The fact that 2/3 of us are now overweight proves this is not a problem of the unlucky or weak-willed few. It's a problem we all face. So we need to take action together. That means letting the food business know that we expect them to change, and letting the government know that we expect them to help. It's time to stop bombarding our kids with relentless ads for foods that will make them fat and then ill. A recent study by Cancer Research UK has proved that the more junk food ads a child can recall, the more calories they will consume. That sounds terrifying, but it's also obvious. It simply means that advertising works. That's why in this week's final episode of Britain's Fat Fight, I turn up at a conference that has been convened for the sole purpose of trying to work out how to get us all, kids especially, to eat more veg. Sir John Hegarty, the advertising guru, admits on camera that his industry has gone too far. He wants to harness the creative powers that sell us so many burgers and so much chocolate, to sell us more veg. Does that sound absurd? I think it's essential that we recognize that it isn't absurd, that, in fact, it is vital. Of the £1 billion spent every year on advertising food in the UK, a measly 1% goes to promoting fresh vegetables. Imagine the impact if we could get that to 5 or even 10%. You will also see me chasing Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt for an interview, when I track him down at the Tory party conference, sponsored by sugar giant Tate and Lyle. It's obvious that he doesn't want to talk about obesity. As he walks away, he mutters about another time, another place. 6 months, and many calls and emails later, that time and place can somehow still not be found. I only want to ask him a few questions. Will the government curb junk food ads targeting kids, not just on telly, but online too? Will he support GPs and practice nurses, and train them to take a more preventative approach, helping their patients lose weight before they get ill? Will he make it easier for parents to make healthy choices by making mandatory traffic light labeling on the front of packets? As our last show goes out, I'll be putting these and other questions up on our Newcastle Can website. And it's not just me asking them. My letter, addressed to Mr. Hunt, has been signed by more than 20 health professionals, including many who are experts on obesity. First to sign it was Jamie Oliver. And in case you are wondering, Jamie really is an expert on obesity. I was proud to sit beside him at the Commons Health Select Committee last week, to talk about the subject. His resilience and tenacity in keeping the issue in the public eye is phenomenal, as is his understanding of the problem. For more than a decade he has put himself in the firing line to help bring about change. Jamie gets some stick, and now a bit is coming my way too. What do we know, with our book deals and TV shows and fat wallets, about feeding our families on £40? That's a fair question. We don't know, and will probably never know, what that feels like, but we do think the food choices facing people on tight budgets are just not good enough. I can't speak for Jamie, but I've made these programs because food is my life, and I believe it can and should be a source of pleasure for all of us, throughout our lives, but it should also be looking after us. I can't bear to think that we are heading for a situation where food is actually doing us more harm than good. That the people being made ill by the food they choose could soon outnumber those being kept well. So it feels like the time is now, however reluctant our government is to take on the giants of the food business. They know they have to do something. Actually, they need to do many things. They need to pull all the levers they can that will make it easier for all of us to choose healthier foods, and eat less junk. But they won't launch these bold initiatives for me or for Jamie. They won't do it for Julie or for the people of Walker. But they might just do it if they think a lot of us are watching, waiting, listening, and hoping for change, and a better chance. Britain's Fat Fight will be screened on BBC One on Wednesday at 9 p.m.